In Christchurch on Friday, 50 people lost their lives to a wicked and cowardly racist armed to the teeth. The New Zealand government has responded to the massacre by pledging to tighten its gun laws. Others have responded by demanding looser gun laws. After all, if you can't stop evil people getting guns, then why not give their would-be victims a fighting chance? That's a debate that has ignited before the bodies are cold. A debate the gunman wants us to have. Some have responded to the massacre by saying the real cause of bloodshed on New Zealand streets today is the immigration program which allowed Muslim fanatics to migrate to New Zealand in the first place. Stunningly, this was not an anonymous post on 4chan, this was a published statement released by Australian Senator Fraser Anning. Anning looks on at a white supremacist slaughtering innocent Muslims, and he concludes pretty much what the gunman concluded. There are too many Muslims. Fraser Anning actually had those thoughts run through his mind, and rather than check himself in for 12 years of therapy, he wrote them out on letterhead with his own name fully visible, and he hit send while the bodies in Christchurch were still warm. That was his response to the shooting, and it was another response that the gunman wanted. Moving from right to left, we then saw this response to the massacre at a vigil in New York. Apparently, Chelsea Clinton should have the shooting particularly on her conscience.
After all that you have done and all this homophobia that you have sowed.
I'm so sorry. Well, certainly it was never my intention. I do believe words matter. I believe we have to show
They do matter. And this right here is the result of a massacre stoked by people like you and the words that you have put out into the world. And I want you to know that, and I want you to feel that deep inside. 49 people died because of the rhetoric that you put out there.
The context is that Chelsea had called out perceived anti-Semitism in a Muslim congresswoman. What Chelsea failed to appreciate is that censuring a politician who happens to be Muslim is Islamophobia, and therefore when Chelsea stood against anti-Jewish bigotry, it was basically anti-Muslim bigotry, and Chelsea now has blood on her hands. Because, no doubt, the gunman, a self-described far-right eco-fascist, was a huge fan of Chelsea's work and hung on her every tweet. It makes no sense, and yet, can't you feel the anger? Can't you feel the agitation? Can't you feel the need to make a response? Events cannot be senseless, can they? And I can't be helpless, can I? So you did this. This is on you. And that attitude is multiplied online. People are blamed, whether it's those on the right, Melanie Phillips, Boris Johnson, Rod Liddle, Douglas Murray, or those on the left, Bill Maher, David Aranovich, Sam Harris, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. It's no coincidence that the terrorist's manifesto describes his politics as eco-fascist and green nationalist. He wants to start a right-left war. And many, while declaiming him, are doing his bidding. And all because we cannot see events as senseless. We cannot stand ourselves being helpless. Here's another response. Let's praise the heroes, those who lunged unarmed at the terrorist and were then gunned down. To be honest, I don't know what to think of that. My heart goes out to each of them, and it goes out to those cowering in a corner awaiting their turn. As Leonard Cohen sang, there is no decent place to stand in a massacre. Primo Levi, a Holocaust survivor, said he was often asked about why more people didn't try to escape the concentration camps. Why didn't he pick up a shovel and knock the guard out and steal his gun and wear his clothes and escape the camp? Levi despaired at that myth of violence preached by Hollywood and believed by millions. We imagine that a plucky young rebel will stand up to tyranny and through a greater show of force will win the day. It wasn't like that at Auschwitz. You were shipped like cattle in a sealed train for a week. You arrived at the camp and the vast majority were herded into gas chambers within minutes. It wasn't a movie. It wasn't a game. You did not survive. But we are so primed to think like it's a movie, like it's a computer game. The terrorist wants you to think that. In his manifesto, he said that Fortnite trained him to be a killer. Though there's no doubt more than a dollop of trolling in that statement. He certainly live-streamed his killings as though it were a computer game, a first-person shooter, and millions have watched. Facebook had to take down 1.5 million videos of it in the first 24 hours. On 4chan and 8chan, anonymous posters praised him and millions more watched silently. Again, this is what he wanted. And as unarmed worshippers lunged at that evil coward, kudos to them. And to those who shielded others, and to those who could do nothing but wait their turn. But let's not buy into the killer's own myth of violence. It's not a movie, it's not a computer game, it's real life, and they are real deaths, and maybe for a bit we need to realize there is no response. When Job in the Old Testament lost his wealth, his health, and his family all on a single day, his friends came to sit with him in silence for a week. It was the best thing they did. They sat in silence. When they felt they had to respond, that was when the trouble came. But we don't like that. We have a 24-hour news cycle and we need reactions. It wouldn't work to say, today 50 people lost their lives in an act of chaotic evil, reminding us all that this world is full of evil and death. The doors are locked and no one gets out of here alive. Now here's Bill with the weather. We can't handle that, but it's true. This is a world of evil and death. I am full of evil and death. The doors are locked and no one gets out alive. Can we sit with that truth? I'm not saying there shouldn't be legislation and debates about legislation and counter-terrorism measures. Sure, absolutely. But can we first face our helplessness and mortality? The doors are locked for you and me, and no one gets out of this place alive. And then people want to know, where is God in all this? Well, let me give an answer that only complicates matters, but the God of Jesus is a God who not only cares for victims of religious violence, he became one. In a world of evil and death, where the doors are locked and no one gets out alive, God came in. And he didn't come in with an AR-15 assault rifle. He became a victim with us and for us, shielding us from the evil and death that really matters, and rising to a new life of cheek-turning love. He's not the hero we deserve. He's not the hero we expect. He is the hero we need. And for now, we sit in silence, we pray, we repent, we point the world to those two realities. This is a world of evil and death, and there is a God who has joined us. It's March 19th. You're watching Speak Life, and this is the LIVEcast.
Hey everybody.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yeah, a subdued LIVEcast talking about a very serious subject. When did you hear about the Christchurch massacre?
I heard about it on Friday. I think it was Friday, wasn't it?
It happened Friday.
Friday.
Yeah, New Zealand's quite a way ahead of us, but
I was mostly working that day, and then I was driving to Wales in the evening. And I was away all weekend. So in a sense, I missed quite a lot of it. You know, I was kind of aware of it, but not a lot of the details.
Yeah, I guess I woke up and I think, I certainly knew about it before the chapel service that I preached at. So Paul and I were both at Felsted School doing the Lenten addresses at that school last week. And so I knew about it before then. And at that stage it was 40 dead, I believe. And it's something that I guess we've had a lot of practice at when we hear death tolls. We know that they always rise. And so, at that stage, really praying that it would not rise too sharply. And I think there are still something like 50 people receiving treatment for gunshot wounds.
Right.
So the death toll, as far as I understand, still stands at 50. But again, it's really worth praying. Really worth praying for the injured because lives are in the balance right now. Even after the events of Friday. But we last week were at this school in Felsted and doing an outreach there to students and speaking. You spoke a couple of times and went into classes, and I spoke a few times, morning and evening, and a wonderful opportunity to get in there. But then on the Friday night, I went to Worcester, to a church called Wood Green Evangelical Church, fantastic church. We had a number of events there over the weekend, and one of the questions I was asked was, where is God in that massacre? And it was interesting, as I was, grasping for words in answering that, in front of 100 people, it really did occur to me, and I said, well, how does God feel about the victims of religious violence? Well, he doesn't just care for them, he became one. And I think Christians have a really profound and complicated answer to the question of where is God in a massacre like that. But one of the answers is, where is God? He became a victim. He became the silent one in the corner, shielding others and absorbing the evil, absorbing the violence, and not striking back. That's a you know, that's a really shocking answer when what you want is God to step in and
just
prevent
strike. Yeah, seemingly. Yeah.
Or smite him or whatever. It's really odd, but it has the ring of truth to it, to me, that actually the God who looks on at a world where the doors are locked and no one gets out alive, he actually enters into that room to become a victim. Gosh, what kind of God is this? And then to rise up again and offer us a new way of forgiving love. This is the kind of God we follow. But those aren't the first reactions that most people make. You know, and you can understand that. There have been a lot of responses to the Christchurch massacre. What are some of the responses that you've been seeing in the media?
Well, I guess the kind of very quick one was to do with the calls for the regulation of weaponry and guns over there.
Yeah, very fast.
Yeah, super quick. And it just struck me that, you know, with an event like that happening, they're such a quick. New Zealand seemed very quick to start considering these things. It just struck me how different that is to what we've seen so often over in the States.
Yeah.
But yeah, there has been a similar response as well over there. From what I understand, there are others who are saying no, actually, access to a firearm would have been a helpful thing.
Right.
Although I can't imagine any Muslim would be carrying a weapon into a mosque.
Yeah. Was there a report that in the second mosque there was a guy outside with a rifle? But
yeah, I vaguely remember seeing something about that.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. But
you know, if you're going to boil down the issue to guns, then, like, in a sense, there are arguments on both sides, because you know you're not going to be able to stop every bad guy getting a gun. If a guy is willing to go and kill 50 people, he's willing to break a gun law.
Probably willing to get a gun.
He's willing to break a gun law.
Yeah, of course.
And so, you know, maybe we need to loosen the gun laws, and then you arm the would-be victims. And but interestingly, in his manifesto, the terrorist basically chose those weapons because he wanted to start a debate about guns, and he wanted to start it in the States, so that, you know, the two sides of the Second Amendment would sort of go to war with one another. He wants to stir that up, and it just seems like, and we fall into. He's everything. He's a coward. He is despicably wicked, and he's a troll. You know, and I think, like, with his manifesto, he's utterly trolled the world's media. He's stirred up this conversation about guns. He stirred up a conversation about immigration, and Fraser Anning, the Queensland senator in Australia, he kind of fell into that one.
Computer games,
right?
That's his thing. Another one.
Yes,
he talks about Fortnite, doesn't he?
Fortnite taught him everything he knows, and you wonder, like, how much of that is him trolling us. But you know, he then filmed himself as a first-person shooter, and millions of people watch. And loads of anonymous commenters on 4chan and 8chan, sort of like, this is amazing, this is the greatest video ever, greatest video game, and treating it like it is a computer game, and just sickening, really. And then other responses, people say it's about the rhetoric. So we saw that woman who accosted Chelsea Clinton in New York, saying, "This is on you." And the backdrop to that is that Chelsea Clinton had recently called out what she saw as anti-Semitism in a politician who happened to be Muslim. And so other people were saying, "Oh, how dare she call out anti-Semitism? That itself is anti-Islamic." And it's the anti-Islamic rhetoric
that has caused this,
that stokes that fire. And you're like, I'm not sure he's following Chelsea
not
Clinton
sure you can,
that closely.
Not sure you can draw a direct line there, really. Not even a particularly wavy line, I wouldn't have thought.
No. No.
But people want to blame. People want to blame someone.
That's it.
You know.
That's it. We want an answer.
Point a finger somewhere.
Yeah. Because otherwise, if there's no reason for it, gosh, it's just chaotic evil. We don't want to live in a world of chaotic evil. That can't be the case. So it's got to be Chelsea Clinton, or it's got to be Candace Owens. So he mentioned Candace Owens in his manifesto, but I've read around this, and a number of people are saying that is a tactic of the alt-right to sort of say, oh, I really praise Candace Owens. And of course, you know, we're talking about white supremacists here who probably aren't the biggest fans of Candace Owens.
Seems unlikely.
But they want to pin on her any slurs that are coming their way and sort of tar her. You know, but all sorts of people have been blamed. You know, Douglas Murray and Sam Harris. So, you know, people on the left and on the right, people of all different kinds of faith and none, are being blamed for their rhetoric. And you just think, well, what about the guy? What about this terrorist? You know?
Yep.
Yeah. And then we've got people talking about the heroes, and I really understand this move, where people want to say, let's shift the conversation from him, absolutely, and we haven't named him, and we're not going to name him, except as an evil coward. But to shift the attention to the heroes, and then the heroes are those who have lunged at the gunman and being, you know, gunned down, but they almost pulled it off. They were almost Bruce Willis against, you know, the terrorists. And I just wonder how much of that kind of buys into a Hollywood vision of the myth of violence. That the one thing that's going to overcome a bad guy with an AR-15 is a good guy with an AR-15. You know.
Yep.
And it does just buy into that myth of violence, but we fall for it all the time. I remember going through Auschwitz a few years ago, and my mind a number of times ran to, okay, well, if I was in this scenario, how would I pick up the shovel that I was using and bash the guard over the head and pick up his gun and wear his uniform and escape out of Auschwitz? Or how would I get over, you know, these lots of barbed wire? Or how would I tunnel my way out of here? And like the answer is, you know, I wouldn't. I'd just die. You know, which is what happened to everybody. But we never want to cast ourselves as the victim. We never want to cast ourselves as, you know, the one facing death and there's no way out. But I just wonder whether this kind of atrocity is a time for us all to actually say, we are victims. The doors are locked. No one gets out of this world alive. There is chaotic evil. It's out there. It's in me. It's a hell of a world at times, and there is no response. You know, there is no way out. It's just that never plays on BBC News. You could never say, the doors are knocked. No one gets out. Here's Bill with the weather. Instead, it's just a real wake-up call to our own mortality, and that the helplessness of those victims is what really is affecting a lot of people, and I can really understand that. But I wonder whether we need to sit with that atrocity and pray and realize our weakness and our helplessness. I don't believe that life is ultimately senseless, but sometimes events like this, they resist an easy answer, that's for sure, and easy responses. And maybe, you know...
And you know, people might think the easy answer is, you know, let's regulate the weaponry or whatever. But I mean, you've only got to... I mean, we here in the UK, I mean, we've done a very good job of regulating firearms ever since kind of Dunblane kind of time, I think, wasn't it? That was the kind of era. And I don't think we've had a mass shooting since then, but yet something else always rises up in its place. I mean, knives and acid are the big ones at the moment. The issue isn't... I mean, the issue is partly weaponry, but you know, the weaponry doesn't get up and do these things by themselves. Like, the human heart is always going to be full of evil and darkness, regardless. So I mean, even if you take the guns away, that's not going to... you know, you're sticking a plaster on the over your chicken pox, really, that kind of thing. It's you know, or over your terminal cancer. It's not going to make any difference.
But that's what we want to do. We want to simplify, and we want to point the finger, and we want it to be on this issue, so that we can keep it at arm's length. And really, what we're struggling with is our mortality. Eric Neal makes a great point. He said, "We are all made imago Dei. All lives matter." It's interesting. In Wood Green Church in Worcester, I was asked, does God care for the Muslim victims of such an atrocity? It was like, absolutely. On page 1 of the Bible, they are made imago Dei, which means in the image of God in Latin. And absolutely, God identifies with the victims of this atrocity, so much so that he became a victim of religious violence. So we definitely need to say that. And I've seen Christians online who have, given good wishes to the Muslim community, then get called out by other Christians as though, like, they are
doing something wrong.
They're shills for the media and leftist agenda, and like, oh my goodness, like, horrific, absolutely horrific. So our hearts just break for those 2 mosques and their families, and we pray that they would know the comfort of the kind of God who joins us in our evil and death and becomes a victim of that evil and death for us. We pray that they would know the comfort of Jesus in the midst of this. But it's a terrible atrocity, and it strikes at the heart of all of us because we all face our mortality. But it's just that's never said on the news. You'll never tune in to Sky News and somebody say, "We're all mortal, and you're next." Here's Sue with traffic and travel.
Well, we talked about that the other week, didn't we? That we're not familiar with death like many cultures are. So if you're a kind of westernized society, we don't see death, particularly in the way you might have done in previous centuries or in cultures that exist today. And someone asked me last week at Felsted after the suffering talk I gave. The question was along the lines of, isn't kind of faith or Christianity just a way of making yourself feel better because of like a fear of death? And I basically said, well, no, I don't think it is. But I mean, I think the reality is there is truth in it. I said, but then the flip side is, I want to say, why are you not scared of death?
Right.
And I basically just said, we live in a culture where we don't see death a lot, but the reality is we're all going.
Right.
Each one of us here in this room, just because you don't think about it,
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's not a problem.
Yeah.
And we should, we should fear death. The Hebrews talks about being set free from, the fear of death.
The fear of death.
The fear of death. Death is I think even as Christians we can fall into the trap of saying, death is just a part of life and, the natural, all that stuff. And you say, well, when Jesus looks at death, he doesn't think it's very natural. He's, raging at death, when Lazarus is in the tomb.
Yeah.
Either he, whatever the translation is, either he's, angry, indignant at death, or he's, moved with compassion or whatever. Both, ways. You're supposed to look at death and say death is not good and natural and right. Yeah, death is an enemy, the final enemy.
Right. Right.
It's
like David Hume was one of the guys who famously said, "I don't fear death because I was non-existent before I was born and I didn't feel it. I'll be non-existent after I'm dead, and I won't feel it, so there's nothing to be afraid of." And he's kind of made that argument. Lots of atheists have made that argument.
Sure.
But Samuel Johnson, the Christian diarist, was told that Hume had said that. And they said, David Hume says he's not afraid because he'll be non-existent, and he was not afraid before he was born. He won't be afraid after he's dead. And Samuel Johnson said, press a pistol to his chest and see if he says the same.
Yeah, exactly.
But we don't see death. And so therefore I wonder whether that's why there are 1.5 million Facebook videos of the shooting that have to get taken down. I wonder why there are such threads on Reddit.
And that came up the other week,
and
didn't
4chan.
We? Said morbid. There's that kind of morbid curiosity as people don't see death.
Yeah. And there are videos with absolutely millions of views of massacres and car wrecks and death, and we have this morbid fascination with it, but we don't know what to do with it, especially because we don't know what the escape is. There is no escape. Well, here comes Jesus, and he takes that death in himself, and he wants to bring us through death. He doesn't beam us up out of the valley of the shadow of death. He leads us through the valley of the shadow of death, and then he promises feasting joy at the end. But only he's got the answer to death. So why wouldn't you turn to him through all of this? So those are just some thoughts about this terrible massacre. We've had Eric Neal also saying there is ongoing slaughter of Christians around the world, and that's true. There's ongoing slaughter of all sorts of people. But there was a shooting in a church in Nigeria. 32 Christians, I think, at last count, had died from that. And yet, you know, had you heard that? Had you heard?
No. No. We talked about there was was it a cyclone?
Right, cyclone in Mozambique.
Yeah,
could be 1,000 people.
1,000 people, and literally zero.
Yeah.
I've heard about that.
You know, Malawi, huge floods in Malawi, many dead.
And it makes you wonder, like, you know, why, like, what is it that pushes certain things into the news and not something else? Why is it that we see this thing so clearly, but actually not that so clearly? I mean, I don't specifically know the answer on these particular ones.
Yeah, it's like that, you know, the famous case of the Titanic goes down, and that made it to number 2 of like a local Scottish newspaper because the first page was a fishing boat went down and 2 locals died. And you can understand that, you know, the 2 local lives versus the 1,000 lost to the Titanic.
And it's I suppose there's what gets picked up as news. I mean, so Australia, so for us here in the UK, and I guess for the States as well, like Australia, kind of New Zealand, that kind of side of the world there, we still see them as being very much like us. So their civilizations look very similar. Yeah, their civilization looks very similar to ours. So when something happens in those civilizations, we feel you know, that's just like that could have been our street, that could have been our building or whatever. Whereas I suppose when we see other cultures that don't look so much like ours, I mean, the reality is that as on mass on the whole, there's a kind of it's not so much to do with us.
Yes,
you know, and that, obviously that's a terrible thing. Yeah, but that's just the reality of the way our media is, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, the thing I always used to think, well, I still think is terrible. You know, it's the old, you know, 200 people have died. 3 of them were British. Right. Those are the ones we should be really concerned about. You know, like this is why we should care. Crash. Yeah. There were 6 Britons who died in the plane crash, where 130 died. Yeah. Like, but I was like, okay, you're telling us we should care now. Yeah. Because 6 of them were British. They were like us. And there's part of that that's inescapable. That, you know, those who are 2 degrees of separation away from you, you will feel their loss more than those who are 6 degrees of separation away from you. Sure. But yeah, the Imago Dei, the sense that all lives matter, really needs to be asserted very strongly, especially when you've got this racist who's like killing people, and then you've got whole different wars of right versus left, people lining up on different sides of the Second Amendment, people lining up on different sides on computer games, people lining up on different sides on immigration. And it really needs stressing and re-stressing. That, we are his offspring. As Acts chapter 17 says, we are God's offspring, and we really should care for all people. All lives matter, indeed. Now, before we talk about our thorny question from last night, which is about the Gospels and are the Gospels fairy tales, we just want to let you know that here at Speak Life, we are getting into really exciting territory. We have an internship coming up beginning in September. Would you like to join us? As an intern, you can come study with us, go on mission together with us, and produce videos and other resources together with us. I think it could be a really exciting venture. And Paul, why don't we have a look at a video to let you know about the Speak Life Foundry. With the Speak Life Foundry, we want to forge evangelists and evangelistic resources to bless the church and reach the world. Why not come join us? We will study together, go on mission together, and produce resources together that will reach this online space. YouTube has 1.8 billion monthly users. Facebook has 2.3 billion monthly users. If they were countries, they would be the biggest countries on planet Earth. But who are the missionaries? Come to us and let's forge this missionary activity together that will reach this online space and make a noise for Jesus.
It would be great to have you join us as we learn together how to project manage the whole creative process, from scripting, coming up with ideas, filming and editing. We'll be working together as a team, developing some incredible resources.
And we want to train you theologically. Jesus said that we'll be fruitful as we abide in the vine, as we spend time with Christ in His Word. And so we want to spend time having a robust, Trinitarian, Christ-centered theology that will stand us in good stead to produce all these great world-reaching resources. We're starting in September 2019 down here in Eastbourne.
And if that sounds exciting, then come and join us. Fill out the form below and get in touch.
Great. And now you can see that the t-shirt that was underneath that jacket actually says radical.
Yep.
So I hope that clarifies things.
Still wearing the same. I do have those moments where I think, you know, we show a video like a thorny question and I think I'm just wearing the same clothes, you know.
I was in Worcester this weekend and somebody said, "Oh, you're wearing that jumper." And I
Wow.
said, yeah, I was like, I've only got 3 jumpers. And then he said, "I know."
Gosh.
But anyway, if you want to join us at the Speak Life Foundry, go to speaklifefoundry.com. If you can think of others who are creative-minded, evangelistically minded, then yeah, let them know. We'd love to come together and as a team do this stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be a new thing. It's going to be quite exciting, and there's going to be a bit of a new building, you know, to work from. So where we are sitting right now, in a couple of weeks, the hammers are coming in. Yep, these walls are going to be down.
Yep.
Kind of going to be a new studio and new teaching space put in and everything. So
it's big, people.
It's going to be big.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
So who knows? We won't be sitting in this setting anymore. We'll be doing something else. So it will be good though. It will be good.
Yeah. Come join us. Come join us.
Yeah.
Now, last night we released. Is this our 3rd thorny question about the Bible? I think it might be.
Well, we did the 5 mini ones, didn't we?
Oh, yeah.
There was that first week of kind of...
That's true.
Bang, 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 bang.
Yes. Okay. So is this our 4th week? Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's about number... Yeah, I don't know.
On the Bible. So basically the logic that we're working through. So thorny questions, if you don't know, are sort of little 5-minute apologetics kind of videos that equip Christians to discuss tricky questions that non-Christians might ask. And we've been dealing with the Bible, and I guess the logic has been, okay, the book in my hands, is that what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote?
Yep.
And we had a Bible kind of an answer to that, which was...
Yep.
Yep. Good. Yep.
Really?
Yes. Really. And then the next sort of video was kind of looking at, all right, well, but did Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tell the truth? And the answer was...
Yes.
Yes. Really.
Really.
Really, yes. But now, Leah, last night we had a look at the question. Have you ever been asked the question, it's just fairy tales, right? It's just made-up stuff. How do we respond to that? There are a number of different ways you could respond to that, but we thought we'd respond to it in this way. Should we see the first minute or so?
Yeah, sure. Here we go.
Previously on Thorny Questions, we've thought about the Bible. In particular, we've looked at the Gospels as a way into the Bible. Now, first we asked, is what we have in our modern Bibles what the Gospel writers first wrote? The answer is yes. Next we asked, can we trust what those authors wrote down? Well, the answer is also yes. Now we ask the question, are the Gospels just fairy tales? When we read Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, do we just say,
cool story, bro?
Are the Gospels cool stories? Are they just fairy tales? It's a question many people have asked, and if it's your question, you're in good company. C.S. Lewis had the exact same question. You do know who C.S. Lewis is, right?
C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia films? They were great. First 2 are killer. I hope he writes another one.
The author of the Narnia books once asked whether the Gospels were just fairy tales, but the answer he got changed his life forever.
On the 19th of September 1931, C.S. Lewis was speaking with his great friend J.R.R. Tolkien. You do know who Tolkien is, right? There will be an exam later. And if you get this question wrong... You shall not pass! Yes, Tolkien was the author of The Lord of the Rings. So in 1931, Mr. Narnia was chatting with Mr. Middle-earth. In fact, they were best friends. Tolkien at this stage was a Christian, but Lewis was not. In fact, Lewis had a big problem with Christianity, namely the Gospels. He could understand that people might believe in a God, he could appreciate that God might want people to live in a certain way. That kind of religion sounded reasonable enough, but that isn't Christianity. Christianity insists on telling a story all about God coming to earth to die for his creatures. More than creeds or rituals or moral codes, it is the gospel story that is central for Christians. And that was Lewis's sticking point. He didn't understand how Jesus, his life, death and resurrection, related to the rest of Christianity. Surely the Gospels are just fairy tales, right? Like all the other fairy tales. Lewis said, when it comes to the old myths, they're great. Lewis loved the Norse and Greek myths, and he thought the Gospels were just the same. But fairy tales are fairy tales. In Lewis's words, they are just lies, even though breathed through silver. They are beautiful, but ultimately empty.
Tolkien's response shocked Lewis.
There you go.
And if you want to know what the shock was,
Yeah, you have to tune in.
you'll have to watch the whole thing.
Yeah, find the video. So, and if you've not seen it, it's on YouTube already, but it will be up on Facebook tonight,
Tonight,
7 p.m. GMT.
drum roll, drum roll. Brilliant. So, have you ever had people say to you, Bible's just kind of, it's just like Shakespeare, it's just like a interesting story, cool story, bro?
Story, bro. Again, I mean, I don't think I've had like someone specifically say to me that, but I know like I've definitely read it, you know, in the comments, like believe your book of fairy tales, you know, whatever, that kind of thing. So,
Yes, yeah.
you know, it's definitely out there, whether it comes in that exact wording or not.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. So, and I say that there are lots of different ways of answering that question, because one way of saying, you know, the Gospels, they're just copycats. Maybe people have said to you, it's just like Horus, or it's just like Mithras, or
Yep.
whatever. And that's people need to be a little bit literate in these matters to actually know who Horus and Mithras is. But, you know, people do say, there are the dying and rising gods, aren't there, in those old myths, in the Norse myths, and didn't Thor, wasn't he basically strung up on a tree for 50 days and kind of crucified, and that was to save his people in one way, shape or form, or, you know, and so people...
With his big hammer.
With his hammer, yeah, where's your hammer? So, yeah. So what do you do at that? Do you just say... No, because you know the earliest copies of what we have about Thor is written from about the 8th century AD, and so people are probably just copying the Christian myth rather than the Christian myth copying the the Norse myth. But what do we do? I guess you've seen the Lutheran satire.
Of course.
Yeah. At Christmas, we reel out this one. So Lutheran satire takes one response to the "Is Christianity just a copycat?" And should we enjoy just a few minutes of that?
Absolutely.
Well, thanks to all of you for coming out to our service this morning, and I pray that the rest of this Christmas day is wonderful for each and every one of you.
Not so fast, preacher man. Behold, it is I, Horus, Egyptian god of the sun, and while you all believe that you've been celebrating the birth of your Lord Jesus, you've really been celebrating the birth of me. For you see, thousands of years before your Jesus came around, I, Horus, was born on December 25th. I, Horus, was born of a virgin. I, Horus, was baptized by a man called Anup the Baptizer, was crucified and was resurrected 3 days later. So you see, your Jesus is nothing more than plagiarized poppycock, and I, Horus, have come to feast upon the sorrow of you foolish Christians.
Yeah, none of the stuff you just said is true.
Yes, it is.
No, there's no reference in Egyptian mythology to Horus being crucified or resurrected 3 days later. There's no documentation anywhere for the existence of a figure named Anup the Baptizer. Horus's mother was not a virgin woman, but the goddess Isis, and there is no specific date anywhere tied to the birth of Horus.
I'm pretty sure there is.
Actually, no. All of these claims and many others indicating that early Christians yoinked the mythology of Horus and stuck it on top of Jesus were all completely made up by Gerald Massey, a 19th century cuckoo banana-bird self-taught Egyptologist who never provided the slightest shred of evidence for any of these claims and who was laughed out of the room by every serious Egyptologist on the planet. So thank you very much for your attempt to ruin our celebration of Christ's birth, but I'm afraid we're all still having a very Merry Christmas, Horus.
Horus? Did I say my name was Horus? No. What I meant to say was, behold, it is I, Mithras, Roman cultic god of the something. And while you all believe that you've been celebrating the birth of Jesus, you've really been celebrating the birth of me. For you see, I, Mithras, was born of a virgin. I, Mithras, had 12 disciples. And I, Mithras, gave those disciples a meal consisting of my body and my blood. Sound familiar, Christian dummies?
Actually, Mithras was born from a rock, not of a virgin. He had 2 companions, not 12 disciples, and the Mithraic meal was one he shared with the sun god, where they feasted not on his own flesh, but on the flesh of a bull. But even if those claims were true, Christians were already confessing the virgin birth, recognizing the 12 apostles, and celebrating the Lord's Supper before they ever encountered any Mithraic cults. So I'm afraid that you've taken neither the holly nor the jolly out of our Christmas, Mithras.
Oh, you must have misheard me. I'm not Mithras. I'm, Quetzalcoatl, Aztec god of the wind. And while you all think that you've been...
No Christian on the face of the planet ever heard of Quetzalcoatl until the 16th century.
Well, then I'm Balder, Norse god of the...
There were 193 popes before Balder...
We could have gone on. You got to see the whole thing. Gotta say.
That's 3 minutes out of 6 that.
Oh yeah, it's pure gold.
They will repay.
Pure gold.
They will repay your investment if you go to Lutheran Satire on YouTube. The link is in the comment section.
Yep.
But that's one way of coming back on. Christianity is just a copycat of all the other myths.
And you go, yeah. So okay, provide some evidence about this. Where have you getting that from? And
right.
And I think he points out later on, if this is all untrue, if none of this is true, why does everybody believe it? Why do everyone say this? He says, well, it's amazing. All these people who insist on evidence for something are happy to believe something else.
Yes.
With entirely no evidence
right.
at all, as long as it agrees with the thing they want to believe. So,
man, check out, and maybe I'll have time, but check out in comments, I'll look up Stephen Fry on QI. Falls into it. He does Mithras.
Oh, does
on
he?
QI.
There you go.
On one of their Christmas specials from about 10 years ago.
Gotcha, Stephen.
Well, it's amazing. And Stephen Fry was like, yes, Mithras was born on the 25th of December and he had 12 disciples and blah, blah, blah. And he gives all this nonsense.
Really?
And the whole thing about QI, if you haven't seen it...
There's someone back in Wikipedia, behind the scenes.
Yeah. saying, Stephen, back out. But, it's all about, debunking myths.
Yeah.
And he thought he was debunking the Christian myth by actually falling for another one. But, you believe what you want to believe, and confirmation bias and motivated reasoning and all of that. Mm-hmm. So one thing, when people bring up all the copycats about the dying and rising gods and why are all our stories the same, and isn't it convenient that Jesus is the prince that slays the dragon and gets the girl? The
church.
The church is the girl.
Church, right?
The dragon is Satan, but yeah. Read Revelation 12, man. So one response is to say, no, Christianity predates all of that, and everything else is a copycat of Christianity.
Sure.
Which, in a sense, I think is true, because I think Christianity dates back to Genesis chapter 1. So, I think right from the Garden of Eden, you've got the foretelling of the myth of the great serpent slayer.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Be the champion and all of that. So, in a sense, I think that's true. But C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien have a different take on fairy tales that I think is fruitful, and I've seen it work in evangelism. When people sort of say, the Christian story is just like all the others, just to start noticing, why do we happen to have all these stories of dying and rising gods and of the prince beating the dragon to get the girl, and why do we have all these stories? Maybe we're living inside a story. And then the key kind of move is to say the fact that we have all these counterfeits means there is a genuine article. There's no such thing as a counterfeit £3 note.
Yeah.
Because there's no such thing as a real £3 note, and you wouldn't go to the expense of trying to generate a £3 note and trying to fool the shopkeeper. No shopkeeper is going to be fooled, because there's no such thing as the real thing. The reason why you have counterfeit £10 notes is because there's the real.
There's a £10 note.
There is the £10 note.
It's real.
So why do we have so many copies of the gospel story? And that's and Lewis and Tolkien would say, yeah, we have so many copies because there is an original, and the Gospels is the original. So
they're all kind of just shadows of the greater story.
Right. Exactly.
The story, the ongoing
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Lewis's conversion was basically, Tolkien tells him that, and Lewis is like, oh yeah, that is interesting. Let me have a look at the Gospels. And when he reads the Gospels, then he sees that it has the inner consistency of truth to it. It's written as
history, not
history.
as
as fictional.
Yeah. So there's not kind of like once upon a time in a land far, far away, a long time ago in a galaxy, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of thing, isn't it? And also if you did want to make something up, it's you don't make up a story about people you live with,
right?
In your local vicinity,
right?
Right. If you wanted to, like last week we had the sock puppets, coming up with the. I mean, if you were going to come up with something, the way you could not get caught is to come up with something happening a long way away that happened
in Atlantis.
Yeah, you could never verify.
Yes.
What you wouldn't do is say, oh yeah, Bob down the road.
Yeah.
Us guys, this happened.
Yeah.
And everyone could just go down and ask them.
Yeah, exactly. 30 years ago, in 1989, this thing happened.
And this is, and it was in this place.
Yeah.
And this person was in charge.
Yeah.
At the time. So-and-so was president. So-and-so was prime minister.
Right.
That's not how fairy tales work.
No, exactly. And you would either just, the myth would not get off the ground because, because you've tied yourself to history, and history has dragged you down. But so Lewis is going through the Gospels, and he's just saying, look, it's written as history, and it has this quality of the ultimate fairy tale. And so he would just say, just as in the incarnation God becomes man, so in the incarnation the myth becomes fact. And so that's it. I like that answer, because you then don't throw all fairy tales under the bus. You actually say that the Gospels are not less than a fairy tale; they are more than a fairy tale. And then, interestingly, on Saturday nights, one of the questions that was asked by a not yet believer, they said, "Isn't this too good to be true?" And I just think that's a brilliant question for somebody to be asking. If they're actually wrapping their heads around the gospel and seeing how good it is and saying, yeah, but it's too good to be true, isn't it? That's the way around you want to do things. I think you want to show them such an amazing story that they wish were true, and then show them that it is. And what I said to that person, on Saturday night is, well, if we're talking about God here, then we're not going to be talking about something that's, it's kind of all right. If we're talking about the God of the Horsehead Nebula and the Grand Canyon and the Swiss Alps at sunset, then we're talking about a God who can actually bring about some really good news. So that you shouldn't say, it's too good to be true. You should say, it's so good it must be true. But yeah, that's one way of answering the question, are the Gospels fairy tales? And we've got lots of quotes from Lewis and Tolkien, and it's come really out of a book that I wrote a couple of Easters ago called Love Story, and if you want to get a copy of that, you can go to myththathappened.com, myththathappened.com. And that's been a fruitful little evangelistic tool in people's hands. Takes people about an hour to read, and especially if people are interested in Lewis and Tolkien and storytelling, that's one that can show them that yes, it has the quality of a fairy tale, but this is the myth that really happened. So cool. Shall that do us for today?
I think so.
I think so. It's 1:48, and you guys have places to go, people to do. I'm sure you do. So
yeah, absolutely.
Next week. Who knows what we're doing?
Good question. Next week, will next week be? Will it be the final live cast before building work begins?
It'll be the final live cast in here. Yeah.
I feel like we should mark it in some way, but
with a sledgehammer, maybe.
The final bit is just us taking the wall down. But
if that's what you want to see, we want votes in the comments. Brilliant. So tonight on Facebook, we are releasing that Thorny Questions video. On Friday, this will be a podcast. I hope you do know also about the Reading Between the Lines podcast. That's our daily podcast that takes you from Genesis to Revelation with 5-minute Bible thoughts. Do tune into that.
Don't forget about the Foundry. So showed the video earlier. If you're interested in getting on board with that, or you know people who might be, do point them in our direction, because we'd love to hear from them.
Brilliant. And if you want to see other thorny questions for us to tackle in future weeks, then just leave a comment on whatever platform you're listening to this on, and we'll have a go at answering some of those.
Sure.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for joining us this week, and see you next week.
Take care. Bye.